The dust settled around her wagon as Bethany Turner watched the last ember of her campfire fade into the darkness. Her trembling hand, instinctively moving to protect the swell of her belly from the biting chill of the Montana Territory dawn in 1876. Alone on the trail for 3 weeks since her husband's death, Bethany had pushed forward toward the promise of Helena, where her sister awaited. The journey from Missouri had been arduous even with Thomas by her side, but after the fever took him, each mile became a testament to her determination. 7 months pregnant and widowed at 23, she had no choice but to continue. The night had been colder than any before, and her thin blanket offered little protection against the cruel spring air. Her supplies were dwindling, with only enough food for perhaps 2 more days. The horses were tired, and so was she. As the first light crept over the eastern hills, painting the vast landscape in hues of pink and gold, Bethany found herself shivering uncontrollably. "Just a little longer," she whispered to her unborn child. "We'll be warm soon." The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the morning stillness. Bethany reached for the rifle Thomas had taught her to use, her heart pounding against her ribs. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, his silhouette growing larger as he approached. Bethany kept the rifle steady despite her trembling hands. "Hello, the camp," the rider called out, his voice carrying across the open plain. "I mean no harm." He slowed his horse to a walk, hands visible. As he drew closer, Bethany could make out a tall man with broad shoulders, perhaps 30 years of age. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with a strong jaw partially hidden beneath several days' worth of stubble. A worn Stetson sat atop his head, and a bandana hung loosely around his neck. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Jacob Everett. I spotted your campfire smoke from a distance. Thought I'd check if everything's all right." Bethany lowered the rifle slightly but maintained her caution. "I'm fine, Mr. Everett, just passing through." His eyes, a clear shade of blue, took in her condition and the meager camp with a single sweep. "You're alone?" he asked, dismounting but keeping a respectful distance. "My husband," she began, her voice catching. "He passed 3 weeks ago, fever." Something flickered across Jacob's face, sympathy, perhaps, or understanding. "I'm sorry to hear that, madam." A gust of wind cut through the camp, and Bethany couldn't suppress a violent shiver. Without hesitation, Jacob removed his heavy woolen coat and stepped forward. "You're freezing," he said, draping the coat around her shoulders. It was warm from his body and smelled of leather, tobacco, and horses. "Stay warm in me." The unexpected kindness from this stranger broke something inside her. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched the coat around herself. "Thank you," she managed. "Where are you headed?" he asked, crouching down to stoke her dying fire with practiced ease. "Helena. My sister's there with her husband." Jacob nodded, adding kindling to the rekindled flames. "That's still a fair journey, 4, maybe 5 days in your condition." Bethany watched him work, the coat a heavy comfort around her shoulders. "I'll manage." He glanced up at her, those blue eyes seeing more than she wanted to reveal. "I don't doubt that, madam, but there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered." The sun rose higher as they spoke, warming the air slightly. Jacob explained that he worked for the Circle M Ranch, about half a day's ride to the west. He'd been tracking some strays when he spotted her camp. "The ranch is on your way," he said. "The owner, Mrs. Miller, is a good woman. She'd welcome you for a few days' rest before continuing your journey." Bethany hesitated. She'd learned to be wary of strangers, especially men on the frontier, but there was something forthright about Jacob Everett's manner that inspired trust. "I don't want to impose," she said. "It's no imposition. Mrs. Miller lost her daughter in childbirth last year. She'd consider it a blessing to help you." As the morning progressed, Jacob helped Bethany break camp. He didn't rush her, didn't press his case too strongly, just quietly assisted while giving her space to decide. When everything was packed and ready, Bethany made her choice. "All right, Mr. Everett, I'll come to the Circle M." "Jacob, please," he said with a small smile, the first she'd seen from him. The journey to the Circle M took most of the day. Jacob rode alongside her wagon, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing brief stories about the territory. He wasn't a talkative man, but his presence was reassuring. By late afternoon, they crested a hill, and the ranch spread out before them. It wasn't the largest operation Bethany had seen, but it was well maintained, with a sturdy main house, bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures. Mrs. Alina Miller proved to be exactly as Jacob had described, a stout woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. She welcomed Bethany without question, immediately fussing over her condition. "Jacob Everett, why didn't you tell me sooner we had a mother-to-be coming?" she scolded, though there was no real heat in her words. The poor girl's half frozen and probably starving. Jacob ducked his head, looking almost boyish in his embarrassment. "Sorry, Mrs. Miller." "Never mind that now. Come in, dear," she said to Bethany. "Let's get you settled and fed." The next few days passed in a blur of comfort Bethany hadn't experienced since leaving Missouri. Mrs. Miller insisted she take the spare bedroom, fed her hearty meals, and spent hours sharing wisdom about childbirth and motherhood. The older woman's maternal kindness was a balm to Bethany's spirit. Jacob came by the house each evening after his work was done. He never stayed long, just checked in to see how she was faring. On the third evening, he found her on the porch, watching the sunset. "How are you feeling?" he asked, leaning against the railing. "Better," Bethany admitted. "Mrs. Miller has been wonderful. She's taken a shine to you." Bethany smiled. "The feeling is mutual." They fell into a comfortable silence, watching as the sky transformed from blue to orange and pink. "Your husband," Jacob said after a while. "What was he like?" The question surprised her. Most people avoided mentioning Thomas, as if speaking of him might cause her pain. "Thomas was kind," she said softly. "Ambitious. He had dreams of building something in Helena, a store, maybe a small hotel eventually. He wasn't a perfect man, but he was good to me." Jacob nodded. "And now you're carrying on his dream." "I suppose I am," Bethany realized, touching her belly, "though it feels more like my own dream now, for myself and the baby." "That's good," Jacob said. "A person needs their own dreams." Before he left that evening, he hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps. "Mrs. Miller mentioned you might be staying on a bit longer." "Yes," Bethany confirmed. "She thinks the journey might be too much right now. My sister isn't expecting me on any particular day, so there's no rush." Something like relief crossed Jacob's face. "That's sensible." "Good night, Mrs. Turner." "Bethany," she corrected him with a small smile. "If I'm to call you Jacob." He nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "Good night, Bethany." As the days stretched into a week, and then two, Bethany found herself becoming part of the rhythm of the ranch. Mrs. Miller taught her to make preserves and showed her the garden where they grew vegetables for the house. The ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully when they saw her, and Jacob. Jacob became a steady presence in her life. He wasn't like other men she'd known. He didn't boast or try to impress her with tales of his exploits. Instead, he listened when she spoke, really listened in a way that made her feel heard. He had a quiet competence about him that she admired, and a gentleness that belied his rough exterior. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Bethany was sitting in the shade of a large oak tree near the house when Jacob approached, leading his horse. "Mrs. Miller mentioned you might like some fresh air beyond the yard," he said. "I thought you might enjoy a short ride to the creek." It's not far. Bethany hesitated. I'm not sure I should be on horseback in my condition. I wasn't suggesting that, he said quickly. I thought we could take the small wagon. It's a smooth trail. The idea of escaping the confines of the ranch, even briefly, was appealing. I'd like that, she decided. The creek was a beautiful spot, shaded by cottonwoods and willows, with clear water running over smooth stones. Jacob helped her down from the wagon and spread a blanket on a grassy patch by the water's edge. As they sat by the creek, Bethany found herself telling Jacob about her life before her childhood in Kentucky, her parents' deaths from cholera when she was 16, her marriage to Thomas at 19, and their decision to head west. "What about you?" she asked eventually. "How did you end up at the Circle M?" Jacob was quiet for a moment, running his fingers through the grass beside the blanket. "I was born in Pennsylvania. My father was a blacksmith, taught me the trade. When I was 20, I headed west looking for something different. Worked on ranches in Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming. Drifted mostly. Came to Montana 5 years ago and found the Circle M. Mrs. Miller's husband was still alive then. Good man. Taught me a lot about ranching. And your family? Do you have any back east?" A shadow crossed his face. "My parents are gone. Had a brother, but we lost touch years ago." There was more to that story, Bethany sensed, but she didn't press. Everyone carried pieces of themselves they weren't ready to share. As the weeks passed, Bethany's condition advanced and her mobility became more limited. Jacob took to visiting her daily, often bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a book from Mrs. Miller's library, or once, a beautifully carved wooden rocking horse he'd made himself. "For the little one," he said gruffly, almost embarrassed by the gesture. Bethany ran her fingers over the smooth wood, touched beyond words. "It's beautiful, Jacob. Thank you." Their friendship deepened, built on small moments and quiet conversations. Bethany found herself looking forward to his visits, her heart quickening when she heard his footsteps on the porch. Mrs. Miller noticed, of course. "That boy's sweet on you," she remarked one evening as they shelled peas together. Bethany felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We're just friends." "MMHMM," Mrs. Miller hummed skeptically. "I've known Jacob Everett for 5 years, and I've never seen him carve a toy for anyone else's child." The thought that Jacob might harbor feelings for her was both thrilling and terrifying. She was carrying another man's child, still technically in mourning. And yet, when she was honest with herself, she couldn't deny that something was growing between them, something that felt like more than friendship. One evening in late July, nearly 2 months after Bethany's arrival at the Circle M, a summer storm rolled in suddenly. The sky darkened to an ominous purple, and lightning flashed across the horizon. Jacob had been helping repair a fence far from the main house and hadn't returned by dinner. As the rain lashed against the windows and thunder shook the house, Bethany found herself growing increasingly worried. Mrs. Miller tried to reassure her. "Jacob knows this land better than anyone," she said. "He'll have found shelter somewhere." But Bethany couldn't shake her unease. When a particularly violent crash of thunder startled her, she felt a sharp pain low in her abdomen. She gasped, clutching the table's edge. Mrs. Miller was at her side instantly. "Is it the baby?" Another pain gripped her, and Bethany nodded wordlessly. "It's time then," Mrs. Miller said calmly. "Let's get you to bed." The labor progressed quickly. Too quickly. Bethany thought in moments of clarity between waves of pain. The baby wasn't due for another 3 weeks. Mrs. Miller sent one of the hands to fetch the doctor from town, but the storm made travel dangerous and slow. As midnight approached, Bethany's pains intensified. Mrs. Miller looked concerned but tried to hide it. "You're doing fine, dear," she assured Bethany. "First babies often come early." But Bethany saw the worry in the older woman's eyes. Something wasn't right, Outside, the storm continued to rage. Through her pain, Bethany heard the sound of the front door banging open, followed by heavy, wet footsteps. "Mrs. Miller," Jacob's voice called out, urgent and worried. "In here, Jacob," Mrs. Miller responded. "Bethany's having her baby." He appeared in the doorway, soaked to the skin, his face etched with concern. When he saw Bethany, something fierce and protective flashed in his eyes. "The doctor?" he asked. "Sent for him hours ago," Mrs. Miller replied. "The storm's slowing him down." Another contraction seized Bethany, and she cried out, reaching blindly. Jacob moved to her side, taking her hand without hesitation. "I'm here," he said, his voice steady. "I'm right here, Bethany." For the next 2 hours, Jacob stayed by her side while Mrs. Miller attended to the birthing. He never flinched, never looked away, just held Bethany's hand and spoke soothingly to her through each contraction. When the baby finally arrived, a tiny, red-faced girl with a strong set of lungs, Bethany was exhausted but euphoric. Mrs. Miller cleaned and swaddled the infant before placing her in Bethany's arms. "She's perfect," Mrs. Miller pronounced. "Small but strong." Jacob stood back, giving Bethany space with her daughter, but his eyes never left them. The tenderness in his gaze made Bethany's heart swell. "Would you like to hold her?" she asked softly. The question seemed to startle him. "I wouldn't know how. It's not difficult," Bethany assured him. "Come here." Hesitantly, Jacob approached the bed. Bethany carefully transferred the tiny bundle into his large, calloused hands. He held the baby as if she were made of the most delicate porcelain, his expression a mixture of awe and terror. "Support her head," Bethany instructed gently. "That's it." The baby squirmed slightly in his arms, then settled, her tiny hand escaping the blanket to curl around one of his fingers. Jacob's face transformed, wonder replacing fear. "She's strong," he whispered, looking down at the infant. "Like her mother." In that moment, watching Jacob hold her daughter with such reverence, something shifted inside Bethany. The feelings she'd been nurturing, trying to ignore or rationalize away, crystallized into certainty. The doctor arrived shortly after dawn, examined both mother and child, and declared them healthy despite the early arrival. Mrs. Miller shooed Jacob out once the doctor was there, insisting Bethany needed rest. But later that day, he returned, freshly shaved and wearing his cleanest shirt. He brought a small bouquet of wildflowers and placed them shyly on the bedside table. "Have you decided on a name?" he asked, looking at the sleeping infant in the cradle beside the bed. "Sarah," Bethany said. "Sarah Grace Turner." Jacob nodded approvingly. "It suits her." He stayed only a short while, mindful of her need for rest, but before he left, he paused at the door. "Bethany," he began, then hesitated. I'm glad you're both all right." It wasn't what he'd meant to say, she could tell by the frustrated look that crossed his face, but she understood nonetheless. "Thank you, Jacob, for everything." As summer gave way to autumn, Bethany and little Sarah settled into life at the Circle M. Mrs. Miller doted on the baby, and the ranch hands all took turns admiring the newest addition to the household. Bethany had written to her sister in Helena, explaining her situation and promising to visit when Sarah was a bit older and stronger for the journey. Jacob's devotion to them was evident to everyone at the ranch. He built a proper cradle for Sarah, carved with delicate flowers and leaves. He spent every free moment with them, reading to the baby from Mrs. Miller's books or simply sitting with Bethany on the porch, talking as the sun set. One crisp October evening, they walked together to the small hill behind the main house. Sarah was bundled against Bethany's chest, sleeping contentedly. The aspen trees around them had turned golden, their leaves shimmering in the late afternoon light. "I received a letter from my sister yesterday," Bethany said as they reached the top of the hill. She and her husband are expecting their first child in the spring. Jacob nodded, his eyes on the distant mountains. Will you be going to Helena soon, then? The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. I've been thinking about that, Bethany said carefully. Sarah and I have made a home here. Mrs. Miller has been like a mother to me and you. She trailed off, suddenly unsure. Jacob turned to face her, his expression serious. And me, Bethany took a deep breath. You've become very important to us, Jacob, to both of us. Something flickered in his eyes, hope, perhaps, or fear. Bethany, I'm not a man of many words. I don't have much to offer except my hands and my heart, but I want you to know. He paused, struggling to find the right words. I love that little girl as if she were my own, and I love her mother with everything I am. Tears welled in Bethany's eyes. Jacob, let me finish, he said gently. I know it hasn't been that long since Thomas. I know you might not be ready. But I needed you to know how I feel, even if you decide to go to Helena. Bethany shifted Sarah to one arm and reached out with her free hand to touch Jacob's face. I'm not going to Helena, Jacob. Not permanently, at least. My home is here now, with you if you'll have us. The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He stepped closer, careful of the baby between them, and cupped Bethany's face in his hands. Are you certain? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I've never been more certain of anything, she answered. I love you, Jacob Everett. Their first kiss was gentle, mindful of the sleeping infant but filled with promise. When they parted, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this properly, he said. Court you as you deserve. Bethany smiled. I'd like that. The following spring, as wildflowers dotted the prairie and new calves wobbled alongside their mothers in the pastures, Bethany Turner became Bethany Everett in a simple ceremony at the Circle M. Sarah, now 10 months old and taking her first tentative steps, was dressed in a tiny white dress sewn by Mrs. Miller. After the wedding, Mrs. Miller announced her intention to sign over a portion of the Circle M to Jacob and Bethany. I'm getting too old to run this place alone, she insisted when they protested. And this way, Sarah will have a legacy. They built a small house of their own on the property, though they still took most meals with Mrs. Miller. Jacob proved to be a natural father, patient and loving with Sarah, who adored him in return. Her first word, to everyone's amusement, was Pa. 2 years after they wed, Bethany gave birth to a son, William Jacob Everett. Mrs. Miller declared him the spitting image of his father, an assessment Jacob received with proud embarrassment. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard, Bethany leaned against Jacob's shoulder. You remember the day we met? She asked. I was so cold, so afraid, I didn't know if Sarah and I would survive. Jacob's arm tightened around her. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I'd ever seen, alone, pregnant, but still fighting. I wasn't brave, Bethany said. I was terrified. But then you came along, gave me your coat, and told me to stay warm in you. And now, he asked, turning to look into her eyes. Bethany smiled, thinking of their life together, the challenges they'd faced, the joy they'd found, the family they'd built. Now I'm warm, she said simply. In every way that matters. As the sun set over the Montana landscape, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and pink, Jacob pulled his wife closer and kissed her temple. So am I, he whispered. So am I. In the years that followed, the Circle M flourished under their care. Sarah grew into a confident young woman with her mother's determination and her adoptive father's quiet strength. William and the 2 daughters who followed him, Eleanor, named for Mrs. Miller, and Rebecca, formed the center of a bustling, loving household. The journey that had begun in grief and uncertainty, with a pregnant woman shivering in the cold dawn and a cowboy offering his coat as shelter, had led to a life fuller and richer than either could have imagined. Their love, born in a moment of simple kindness, had built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the warmth two hearts can create when they beat as one.